Hi, this is Eric. It's March 27th. It's a Thursday afternoon where I am. And I'm here to talk about a number of items. There's so much going on right now that it's really kind of hard to keep track of it all. And most of the news is not particularly good, but it is what it is. So I'm just going to kind of run through a list of things that I wanted to talk about. And many of you, I think, if you're following me on Substack, you probably are following other people who are, great experts as well. But in any case, I'm going to just put in my 2 cents here. So one of the big news items is this issue of whether Iran is going to be attacked or not. You recently there were reports that the United States. This is Scott Ritter is talking about this, and Scott has got a decades-long reputation for being accurate about many, many things. He was a UN weapons inspector. He was a weapons inspector in Russia and in Iraq and so on. And he is claiming that Iran is under grave threat of attack because the U.S. government has got weapons that they're basically, you could say, bunker buster bombs that can penetrate deeply into Iran's defenses and take out all of its nuclear facilities and probably its weapons and especially even decapitate its leadership. So whether that's true or not is difficult to say. Scott feels very strongly about it, and but he's there are other people like Larry Johnson and others who think that that's just not really that's not happening. That Iran actually has very strong air defenses, and it also has missiles that can hit and destroy Israel, as well as basically all the oil facilities around the Persian Gulf. It can take out Diego Garcia, which is the military base where the United States is presumably sending a number of strategic bombers, which are going to be used in this upcoming attack. So it's like a standoff at the OK Corral, except with nuclear weapons. It's just really, really very uncertain and very dangerous. Iran has basically indicated that it says it doesn't want nuclear weapons. So if it doesn't want nuclear weapons, then you'd think that if the United States had any moral integrity, they would say, okay, they don't want nuclear weapons, then fine. But instead, the United States is putting all this pressure on them, and it's got sanctions and so on. Trump has broken the JCPOA. This is an agreement that Obama negotiated back in I think it was like 2014, and Trump came in and he just said we don't like it. This is classic example of the old Indian adage, the Native American adage, white men speak with forked tongue. You can never expect them to keep a treaty. So that's not a good situation. And as a result, Iran is saying, look, if you attack us, we can take out your oil facilities. We can take out. It would only take one missile aimed at the Dimona Israeli nuclear facility that would wipe. Basically, it would wipe Israel essentially off the map, because Dimona is the area. It's an area of Israel where they have nuclear reactors, and they basically develop the nuclear weapons there. So there's a lot of radioactive material. If Iran were to send one of their hypersonic missiles or a whole bunch of missiles to take that area out, there's a good possibility that the whole area of the surrounding area would be radioactively contaminated. And it's not too far from where Israel is a small country, so Israel could easily be taken out. Of course, that would also mean that the Palestinians would die too. So it's just a really bad situation, and it's hard to say how that's going to turn out. Now, another issue is this we're talking about them. For those of you who are not aware, I actually grew up at a time when I think I was like 5 years old or something, and I'm watching television, And I'm seeing these scenes in Congress where somebody is being dragged out of Congress, yelling and screaming. And apparently, what I didn't realize at the time and what my parents were completely appalled at was the fact that there was this senator named Joe McCarthy, and he was he was like a huge anti-communist, like to the max. And at one point he said, "I have a paper here which has 200 names of communists who were in the State Department or in the military or wherever it was." He's saying that there's commies everywhere, and heaven forbid there were more commies. Maybe we wouldn't have had the ensuing 60 years or 80 years of madness that the world is going through. But in any case, it was a period where people were losing their livelihoods, losing their rights to free speech. People were being jailed, and here we are again, where just to give several examples, Columbia University is a major. It's one of the Ivy League schools where the elite go to train and go to study, and it's in New York City. And there's one guy, I forget his name, doesn't matter, but he's Palestinian by descent, and he was basically saying, this what Israel is doing in Gaza is terrible, which any person with any principles would agree with. And because of that, he was summarily picked up by the police, and he's not charged with a crime. He's charged merely with the offense of espousing policies that go counter to U.S. quote-unquote national interests, which is defined as whatever Trump and his team thinks is national interest. It's like there's no room for another opinion. Then you have people like Scott Ritter, who I mentioned earlier. His passport was taken away because he wanted to go to Russia to make a film to promote peace between the United States and Russia. They wouldn't even let him out of the country. He doesn't have a passport. And when Trump came into office, he said, "Okay, now it's freedom of speech." So now I haven't heard, but I have yet to hear that Scott Ritter has got his passport back. He's not even allowed to travel. So what's that about? Then you have people like Max Blumenthal, who has been a great advocate for peace and one of the best journalists, best investigative journalists in the United States, best investigative journalist alive today. And he went out for he took his family on a vacation to Latin America, and when they came back, he was interrogated at the airport and basically intimidated. At one point, he was arrested in his home, and they took him to jail for a day or two, and this is all intimidation. But how far is this going to go? There's another woman. She's South Korean, and she came here when she was I think 7 years old, and she wanted to become. She got a green card, which allows her to stay in the United States, but she's not a citizen. And she's also been threatened with deportation. She's lived here, she's been here for 20 years. So that's a real problem. And so we've got this McCarthy era situation coinciding with a serious threat of war against Iran. Okay, now the next thing is that I want to talk about the signal leak, and Caitlin Johnstone, I think she has the right attitude towards a lot of these things. So you probably all know that the former peacenik Tulsi Gabbard, she's in this meeting with a bunch of these warmongers in the Trump administration. They're all talking about how they're planning to take out Yemen, I guess, and they're all gloating about the fact that they've got the wherewithal to send a message. It's not like there's an immediate threat. It's not like Yemen did something other than just try to make us. They were what Yemen is doing is there's something called this. There's in the UN Charter. There's a kind of an agreement that genocide needs to be opposed wherever and however it's possible. And we all know that in the UN Security Council, there's been, South Africa, staged a lawsuit against the Israeli government with the ICJ, the International Criminal Tribunal, International Criminal Court of Justice, and everybody knows Israel is committing genocide against the Palestinians. So, but nobody is doing anything about it. So finally, Yemen, which is this rather impoverished country that has been attacked for years by Saudi Arabia and the United States and England, they just don't like countries that stand up against imperialism. So here is tiny little, relatively small Yemen, but they're smart, and they've got missiles that can attack Israel. So the United States says, okay, well, we have to protect the 51st state Israel, so we're planning a major attack. And it's caught on signal, which is it's supposed to be an encrypted, messaging system. And all of the major warmongers in the Trump administration are all planning it and all gloating about, oh, this is going to be great, really good idea. And even Tulsi Gabbard, is thrown in the towel. And, she's basically decided that if a choice between, waging peace and getting power, she'll take the power. She's just a complete sellout. But this is Washington. It's like people go to Washington with good intentions, and I'd say 95% of them are either, taken over, like Bernie Sanders. He was getting arrested during the civil rights movement, and yet now he's talking about big bad Russia, and he's a warmonger now himself. What happened to this guy? If there's something so toxic about the Washington political environment, that it just takes usually well-meaning people and turns them into warmongers. The only person I can think of who maintained their principle, two people I can think of. One was Dennis Kucinich, who actually sued the Bush administration for the war in Iraq, and also Cynthia McKinney, who stood up strongly against the plight of the Palestinians. She was basically kicked out by either the Democratic Party establishment or by the Israeli lobby. So, but the issue is that there's a big brouhaha about the leak, and how dare these stupid guys in the Trump administration using the terms of the Democrats. These stupid, I'm not saying that they're not stupid, I'm just saying that the Democrats are making a big deal out of it. But the issue is not that they're stupid and they let this thing leak, and they allowed this jerk Jeffrey Goldberg, who's a former Israeli army soldier, American soldier, volunteering, and now he's the editor of a major magazine in the United States. Which I gotta, as an aside, my parents used to subscribe to the Atlantic Monthly, and that was considered to be a kind of higher end intellectual magazine. And I used to read articles from it. One article I read was about how these guys. This is like in the 68 or 69, maybe 1970, and it was this article about this place called Wheeler's Ranch in Sonoma County, California, and there, it's free land, so you could just go there, set up a tent, and live there for free, and it's basically it's a big hippie hangout. I went to live there. I was there for 6 months, and I thought, let's give this a try. And I thought, after about 6 months, I thought, these people are stoned out on acid, every day, and one woman said, I think everybody should F-U-C-K, everybody else. And this is a woman, she's living in this tent with her 2 kids in total squalor. She's filthy, her kids are filthy. It's really disgusting. And I'm thinking, I think I'd rather be a Zen monk. I think that's why I came here. I'm not gonna hang out with these people anymore. It was interesting while it lasts, but anyway. But the thing is that the Atlantic Monthly had an article about it, and when I read the article about it, it's like my last year of college. I'm thinking, hey, This sounds really interesting. Being in the a staid middle class family, which is rather dysfunctional itself. I thought, well, you know, what's going on at Wheeler's Ranch couldn't be any worse than this. But anyway, so I went to California, and the rest is history. I was there, and then I went to the Zen Center and became a monk, and my life proceeded from there. But in any case, the Atlantic Monthly has really degenerated into just a typical, it's kind of like quasi-liberal, but basically neocon rag. And this guy Jeffrey Goldberg somehow um, crashes this private signal encrypted conversation, and then he reports about it. And as Caitlin Johnstone points out, if he were a real journalist doing his job, he would have reported, hey, these guys are warmongers. They're trying to drag us into a war. What are they doing? This is terrible. But instead, he left the meeting because he didn't want to violate security, it's like he wins the anti Edward Snowden Award for cowardice in journalism. But there you go. Okay, so now I want to talk about the nature of U.S. negotiations. And as I mentioned, you have Trump. He campaigns, I'm going to end the war in Ukraine in 24 hours. Well, here we are, and he sends to the negotiations a real estate guy, who's got no experience in foreign affairs and apparently knows very little about the history of the Ukraine conflict in the first place. But he's a nice guy, and Foreign Secretary Lavrov of Russia says, yeah, he's a good guy. We can talk with him. But how serious are these people? So you've got Trump, who he says he wants to win the Nobel Prize, and yet he's planning an attack on Iran. He's already, and here's the thing: is this Witkoff. He goes to see Bibi Netanyahu just before Trump's inauguration, and he says to Bibi Netanyahu, "You're going to have a ceasefire. I know you don't want a ceasefire, but you're going to have the ceasefire." And eventually, he basically, it's like what can I say? It's a once in a lifetime event where the United States actually tells Bibi Netanyahu what he's going to do, and Bibi Netanyahu complies. But of course, we don't know what went on in that conversation. And my guess is what they went on was, hey, Bibi, look, Trump wants to look good. He wants to look like he's a peacemaker. So just hold off for a little bit. Release a few hostages. Make it look like you're doing the right thing. Let in some supplies so that the people don't starve to death immediately. And then after a couple of months, then you can cook up some excuse and start all over again. So why is Witkoff not flying out to Tel Aviv or Jerusalem and saying, hey, look, Israelis, you guys are nuts. You got to stop killing these people. It looks really, really bad, and it's making us look bad, and it's basically isolating us and you and the rest of the world. But apparently Witkoff doesn't have the diplomatic skill to do that. So that's an example of, just the typical shallowness of U.S. negotiations. Not to mention, as I mentioned earlier, Trump walking out on at least, three treaties: Open Skies Treaty, the INF Treaty, the JCPOA. He's completely unpredictable, and he says something, and you think, oh yeah, the U.S. is changing its attitude, and they're going to do the right thing. And from what I'm hearing of the Russians that I listen to, or the commentators who are, even American commentators who are in contact with Russians, say, look, we understand the United States is completely unreliable. They've always been unreliable, and so we're just going to have to go ahead and do what we have to do. So the last item I want to talk about is the issue of how far is Russia going to go in this war with Ukraine. I was in 2015. I was in Crimea. I was in the city of Sevastopol. And I met a woman there who was in the military of the Russian military. And her story was that she told me that in 2013, this was several months before the U.S. coup in 2014. So in 2013, there was a raid on a military armory. That's where weapons are stored, and she knew at that time that a coup was being planned. And sure enough, the coup took place in February of 2014, and she knew, because she's a resident of Sevastopol, she knew that the fascists who had basically taken over the government with the United States' help were going to come in and cause havoc. And so she came back and she joined up with the Russian military. She quit the Ukraine military, deserted, and went to Russia. But the issue here is that there's large amounts of Ukraine are historically Russian, and they have not been brought under the control of Russia, even though many of the people wanted it. So, for example, in May 2nd of 2014, there was a big demonstration in Odessa against this coup regime, and these fascists came down in a train and herded the people into a building, set the building on fire, were shooting at people, beating them to death if they jumped out of the windows, and that was Odessa. But Odessa was founded by Catherine the Great of the Russian Empire, so it is a Russian city. All the people there, most of the people there, have historically been Russian speakers, culturally Russian, and favor Russia. And so they're caught in this essentially, fascist, hyper-nationalist, racist regime, and they don't want any part of it. But they're stuck. They're stuck there. So there's a lot of talk among Russian people about what to do about Odessa. Same thing goes for Kharkov. Kharkov is a Russian-speaking city. There's another city that people don't hear as much called Dnipropetrovsk, and this is a Russian city. It was built by the Soviet Union, and these people are just waiting for the Russians to save them. Many of you who are not familiar with this situation simply cannot believe that people in Ukraine many of the people in Ukraine have no love at all for the government there. Remember that in 2019, Vladimir Zelensky it's the biggest setup in history. Here's this guy, he's playing a school teacher, and somehow he ends up in the presidency of Ukraine, and he basically cleans up the corruption and so on. And the TV show is called Servant of the People, and then he decides to run for president of the Servant of the People party. So the whole thing was a great big PR scam against the people of Ukraine, thinking that we're going to get a peace candidate. He won by 75% against Poroshenko, who was the one who really initiated the war against the people in eastern Ukraine and the Donbass. In recent times, the United States is saying, we really don't like this guy Zelensky, and what are we going to do about him? Well, let's stage some elections and have some new people come in. Let's look at Poroshenko, or there's another woman named Timoshenko, Yulia Timoshenko, who was jailed for corruption, but she was taken out, and taken out of prison, and she's around. She was threatening Russian speakers with dropping an atomic bomb on them. There's a YouTube video where you can see her talking with one of her friends, saying, "Yeah, we should just drop a bomb on these people." So that's another presidential candidate. That's a great choice. And then you got Zelensky, he's this general who's got pictures of Bandera, the Nazi collaborator, in his office. So these are the replacements that the United States think would be suitable in place of Zelensky, as if it's going to make any difference whatsoever. So I asked my Ukrainian friend who's living in Ukraine right now, and I'm worried about this person because, I mean, what's going on there? It's nuts. They're dragging people off the street, and if you speak out too loudly and they notice you, you're in serious trouble. But this person says, "Look, I come from a Russian-speaking city. I like the. I grew up during Soviet times. I like the Soviet Union. They built all the stuff that Ukraine hates Russia, and yet Russia built their country for them." And as Caleb Maupin points out, Caleb is another great commentator and a communist as well, pointed out that Ukraine was basically just a geographical area. It wasn't even considered a separate state. And the Ukrainian language wasn't even a real language. And after the Soviet Union came into existence, in order to elevate the Ukrainian people who spoke this dialect, they basically created the Ukrainian alphabet and elevated people and educated people and so on. So Ukraine really became, worthy of being a country on its own. Due to the Soviet Union creating that. And that was probably a big mistake on their part to create it a separate status as a separate Soviet republic. But that's what they did, and as a result, 100 years later, here we are. So the question arises, how much of Ukraine is Russia going to take? And we really don't know what the plan is. But in my opinion, the only way to really solve this problem is for Russia to take back those territories in this area of Ukraine, which was essentially cobbled together by Russian-speaking areas, Hungarian-speaking areas, Slovak-speaking areas, Romanian-speaking areas, and also Polish and this Ukrainian dialect-speaking areas. And if you subtract all of those areas from along with the Russian, there's not a lot of Ukraine left. And that's basically the question. At a certain point, when this war really became super active, that is, when the Ukrainian military was about to attack the Donbass, Vladimir Putin he made a couple of statements. He said, for one, Odessa is Russia. And so that's something to consider. And the other thing that he said was that Ukraine, if there is a war, if Ukraine attacks, which in fact it was, because in February of 2014, in the lead up to Russia invading, the shelling on the people of Donetsk and Lugansk, this area of eastern Ukraine. There was, as people know, there were the Minsk agreements, which were supposed to end the conflict and arrive at some kind of accommodation. And of course, we now know that there was no intention on the part of Ukraine or the West to fulfill that. So in February of 2014, the shelling had increased from like 40 a day up to 1,400 a day. And at that point, it was actually the Communist Party of the Russian Federation introduced a resolution into the Duma, into the Russian parliament, and said, look, we've got to do something about this because there's going to be a massacre there if you guys don't step in and stop it. And so that's exactly what happened. And at the time, Putin said, if this gets to a war, there's a real question of whether Ukraine will continue to exist. So that is the question that I'm kind of leaving you on this discussion today. I've talked about a lot of different things, and some of you may be somewhat familiar with them, but I just wanted to give you my take on it all. And it's very hard to say. It's the this McCarthy situation is really becoming more and more serious, and the situation with Iran, and will Iran really be preemptively attacked in order to destroy it as a viable country? That is a real concern. Of course, the ongoing situation with Gaza is a terrible situation. Israel is completely out of control, and there are commentators that say Israel is lost. It can't possibly win, but the reality is that hundreds of civilians are dying every year because of the Israeli military. So for a military that is losing, they sure are inflicting a lot of suffering, and there doesn't seem to be any easy way to stop it. And finally, with Ukraine, I just saw a video by he's a Chechen commander, and quite a extraordinary person from what I can tell. He's a general. I think he's a commander in any case. And he was saying that the Ukraine military is still planning attacks on Russian territory as a way to have a bargaining chip. And they're watching this carefully, and they're hoping that nothing will happen. But the point is that the Ukraine situation is far from solved, and it's going to take a lot more suffering before this whole tragic situation resolves itself, where you had a country that was doing actually quite well during Soviet times. Nationalist elements were nurtured by the West in order to, in a divide and conquer strategy, to break it off from the Soviet Union, and it's Ukraine has gone down ever since. And where it all ends is very difficult to say. So that's what I have to say today. And thanks for listening to my rant. As you know, I have T-shirts that you can buy on Amazon or on Gear Bubble. You can buy one of those. I call them information billboard T-shirts. So that it's not promoting me. It's just promoting a consciousness. We have to wake people up to realize what is actually going on in this country. And too many of them are still stuck in this paradigm of Democrat versus Republican, or it's the West versus the evil Russians, or the evil Chinese, or the evil Iranians. All of that is just narrative. It's really got to go. So thanks again for listening, and I'll talk with you soon.